Hey everyone, welcome back to our 6-part series. I'm here with Dr. Nick from Integrative Wellness Group, and we're here together to really just wrap up everything that we've talked about in our series. I know our series has been very focused on some of the aspects of the body that can be dysfunctioning or burdened in order to create some of the symptoms that we might be dealing with on a daily basis, like fatigue, as well as brain fog, poor immune system, and a variety of other things. And what I find so interesting is when I go through results with some of our patients, a lot of times they ask, does everybody have these infections? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. And it doesn't always mean that that is going to be the primary problem. And I think that's what's really great about our practice and how Dr. Nick, myself, and even Dr. Kyle collaborate together is we're always trying to decipher what is the foundational issue for the patient in order to help them to get onto the right path. And Dr. Nick is actually heading our brain and neurological program here at IWG, and we also collaborate together to work on the emotional aspect of health and also illness. And I think it's been such a huge part of the puzzle because when you have had long-standing symptoms and you've been all over the place, and maybe you've gone down this road, maybe you've tried functional medicine, maybe you've tried some level of alternative medicine, and you just find yourself going doctor to doctor and not necessarily getting better through the traditional biochemical approaches, meaning medicine, supplements, diet, there might be more to the story, and that's something that we really try to take into consideration with our patients to make sure that we are putting them on the right track.
And I think that's, hitting it nail on the head is people always were searching for a diagnosis. I mean, a true diagnosis, the root cause, not a diagnosis of the symptoms. And most people, when they have a diagnosis, it's biochemical. America looks at the biochemical process, and most of it being, ran by the pharmaceutical, but, the alternative aspect of that is the functional medicine. And then kind of the second step down from there, the most common diagnosis is going to be more physical. And even in IWG, we've focused on that for a long time, and we've been bringing more of the emotional component into it. But now we're really bringing it full circle to really have the emotion that affects the brain, but also just the neurological aspect of the brain. So we're really excited to bring it full circle and to be able to actually help people exactly where the biggest voids are coming from.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because Dr. Nick, through his journey, has been very in tune with energy and chakras and how that ties into emotions and even some of our conditions that we experience. And I found it so interesting that the more that we learned about chakras, we learned that chakras are energy systems in the body and they tie to very specific organs. So as an example, when someone comes in with an autoimmune thyroid condition, something called like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, normally what I will inquire about is going to be, do you have a period of time in your life or a specific scenario that maybe you didn't speak up or you didn't speak your truth? And this can go back to being a child that maybe you had a lot of expectations on yourself because mom and dad wanted you to go a specific way and you just did what you were told to do and didn't speak up. It doesn't mean that maybe it manifests to where you are right now, but it can be something that's unresolved from the past. So breaking through some of those emotions that are usually in the subconscious, we're usually not aware of them, which I think is very important to understand. That is a huge part of the healing process. Because if you don't resolve that emotional layer, you could take all the supplements in the world and do all the dietary changes in the world, but you might not necessarily see things change.
I mean, our body is a combination of that three-triad pyramid. It's chemical, it's emotional, and it's physical. So if you're only healing two aspects of it, and there's still that third lingering one, you're really not going to be able to be optimal and be yourself. Okay. So that's the awesome thing is, we can help the sickest of the sick with, the same foundation progress, or you can help somebody that's crushing their life, an executive that really just wants to perform just a little bit better. That little bit better is going to make tremendous change. So it's very fun to be able to take the same foundation, the same path to help somebody at different polarities of where they're really at in life.
Definitely. And I think what's interesting too about the neurological brain program that we have now launched in 2018 is that talking about these emotional layers, a lot of times when these emotional layers are there, they actually create a lot of abnormal pathways within the brain. So, when you're talking about depression, anxiety, mania, you talk about things that a lot of us maybe don't experience every day, but we have moments of feeling really anxious or feeling really stressed and feeling like our coping skills aren't there. And especially if it's a scenario that reminds us of our past, that's because there's been a lot of neurological pathways that have been strengthened over time due to whatever that action, whatever that event was from the past. So when you talk about resolving the emotion, that's really step number one. But step number two is also now reprogramming the brain and getting that working optimally. And that's where the neurofeedback is coming. So Dr. Nick has now launched a program that uses something called acute EEG as well as neurofeedback, and I'll let him explain a little bit more about that.
So this is my baby. I love the brain and as well as the mind and how the mind affects the brain. But when you look at the brain, it's electrical. So the best way to measure it is through an EEG, which stands for electroencephalograph. But now there's this kind of quote-unquote newer technology that's called acute EEG. And it's really just called a quantitative EEG. And quantitative really just means is it breaks down really all those fine mathematical numbers of the actual electrical components of your brain to help us understand what's going on in different aspects of the brain.
Ooh, you kept it really simple. I'm so proud of you.
I'm trying not to get too deep, at least on this segment anyways. So when you look at the brain, it looks at the different components. You have the forebrain, the side brain, and the hindbrain, keeping it really, really simple for everybody. But with those things, you want to check and see all the wavelengths, the actual electrical components, how the brain's working, and see if it's working too high, too strong, or too low in those areas. And the really fun thing about it, fun for me, is when you go through and you look at it, you can really see a client's symptoms and how it's correlated or not correlated to the actual activity of the brain. And this is huge because if somebody's symptoms are actually a neurological, a brain kind of dysfunction, which controls everything, or if it's stemming from something else. So from the component of knowledge is power, the more you actually understand how the body works in every single discipline, the better you can really help it and optimize it. And it just gets me really excited.
Yeah, well, I think it's been huge because when somebody is coming in with a lot of neurological involvement and they have been many places and they're not necessarily getting better again with, the traditional biochemistry approach of medicine as well as supplements, herbs, dietary changes, that's when you want to look beyond that and you want to see, is there an emotional component? Is there a neurological component? Because that might be where you need to start. So it's been really huge to make sure that we are looking at the person, looking at the whole person, taking everything into consideration to make sure that we're putting them on the right track. Because I would always say to my patients, I don't want to waste your time or your money. It's very important for us to make sure that we're giving you what you need and fixing the foundation. Because if you don't fix the foundation, then it's very difficult to progress. And many people, when we work with them and say we do find these infections that we talked about it in the prior modules, is you might have these infections and maybe you could benefit from, say, detoxification or working on parasites, etc. But if your foundational problem is neurological or emotional, you're not going to see the results that you hope for. You might only get 20% better. So it's very important to kind of lay the foundation and make sure that we're taking that correct first step.
And no two people are alike. That's why it's our passion to really figure out, how to help somebody. Sometimes it could be the exact same quote unquote diagnosis and you need to help them strengthen out their neurological voids. And then as that heals, then we need to actually work on, the infections, the toxicities that might have been the primary concern. It just depends where the person's at. And sometimes it's the exact opposite. Sometimes you need to take down that toxic load, heal the body from infections, and then we can start to heal the brain and the neurological system. But I think from most of the majority is, we want to fight, and actually not heal. And, the biggest thing you were talking about is really reprogramming the body to work efficiently. So with neurofeedback, it's all quote unquote, it's a word called neuroplasticity, which is really just a fantastic word of pretty much doing the same thing over and over and over to strengthen a pathway so it becomes more efficient. Neurofeedback works how really all learning works, is through a positive feedback a mechanism. So when you go through the training, there's all these little hints of, oh, you're doing this right, you're doing this right, you're doing this right, and it teaches the brain to work with how we sense the world. It teaches us how we visualize, it teaches us with hearing, it teaches us with really everything that affects our nervous system. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think a couple just like practical things about this program is this is really huge because all you have to do is sit there and watch a screen. So this is really great for kids, ADD, depression, Asperger's, autism, to really start to reprogram the brain. And they don't have to do much. It's really the machine and the technology is doing the work for them. So it's non-invasive, it's simple, and I think that's a really important factor. And the other really big thing is that the changes are permanent. So they're permanent in the sense that if you're reprogramming that pathway will be a permanent change. The only thing that changes that moving forward is if there is a introduced trauma. If that means it's a head trauma, if it's a concussion, or if it means that there's an emotional trauma. That's the only time that the brain would change or that pathway could change. But otherwise, the neurofeedback training is a permanent change on the brain, which is really huge.
And actually what they found is it's not only permanent, but it actually continues to get better. Because as kind of the theory goes, the better it gets, the better it gets. As you start improving a system and a pathway and you're using it more, it's actually going to continue to become more efficient and more efficient. So they've done what's called brain maps, the mapping of how the brain activity is. And even a year after somebody's gone through 20, 40 sessions of really getting that aspect of the brain working properly, they do it again a year later, and it's actually more efficient and better than when they even stop their training, which is just amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope this information was helpful for you. We are going to be doing a Q&A, so please keep your eyes peeled for when that will be, and you'll be able to hop on, ask questions about this technology, the neurofeedback, as well as some of the emotional work that we do here, and we'd be happy to answer all of your questions.
And there's a chance for you to get really deep.
Bye.
Bye.